You've been hearing us talk about Imperial yeast for a while now, and that's because we absolutely love this stuff. With 200 billion cells in each pitch-right pouch, we rarely even need to make starters these days. Unfortunately, not everybody has the access to Imperial yeast those of us out here on the West Coast do, because they're based out of Portland, Oregon. But things are about to change. Imperial Yeast is excited to announce the opening of their East Coast location, which is huge for those who want the freshest yeast possible with the best pitch rates, but brew on the other side of the country. They're going to start by offering their four most popular strains, A38 Juice, A07 Flagship, L13 Global, and Go3 Dieter, with the goal of providing their full lineup of yeast by mid-2021. So start your planning now at imperialyeast.com. Nothing is more useful than beer for strengthening the body, and also more detrimental to our pleasure if moderation be lacking. I took a little creative liberty in adapting this quote by none other than Pliny the Elder himself. He referred specifically to wine, but I trust he'd agree that this applies to any alcoholic beverage. As brewers, we do tend to have ample access to beer, cider, mead, and the various other boozy concoctions we like to make. And I know I'm not the only one who has, on occasion, lost track of the number of samples that I've pulled from my kegerator or considered the impact that my drinking might be having on my health. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and in this Brews Views episode, I'm joined by contributor Cade Jobe to tackle an important topic that I feel like is easily overlooked by those in the beer and brewing world.
Yeah, it's funny you say that it's overlooked, but it's such a relevant topic all the time, right? I mean, beer is an alcoholic beverage, and
right.
Alcohol does things to you, right? Like it has some cognitive things. It also, can help you gain weight and have negative health issues. But this is something that I don't know if it's like ignored or just like nobody wants to talk about it because nobody wants to like share their experiences, or if it's just like a really important conversation that people have like behind closed doors with their counselors or something. But no, I mean, like this one is fun. I've been asking you to do an episode on this for a while, and I'm glad I finally got you to agree to it. So.
Yeah, a note on that. I've been really hesitant to do this, and I just kind of want to get this out there up front that our purpose in doing this episode is neither to deride anyone for the choices that they make for themselves or to self-righteously impose our opinions on other people. Personally, I'm a very strong proponent of people doing whatever the hell it is that they want with their lives, so long as it doesn't hurt me or my family or other people. However, professionally, as some of you may know, I'm also a clinical psychologist who works directly with substance abusers on a daily basis. I feel like I have a little caveat every time we record one of these Brews Views episodes, but this topic is one that I was very hesitant, like I said earlier, to address because I fear that people might take my personal opinion as being some sort of like professional commentary. That is absolutely not the case. The host of this show is Marshall Schott from Brewlosophy, not Dr. Schott the psychologist. And if any listeners out there happen to work in the field of mental health or substance abuse, if I say something you disagree with, that is okay. These are my views, which is what this series is all about. I am beyond happy to field emails from listeners who have feedback on this episode, but I am not at all interested in arguing with anybody about our differences in opinion on this stuff. I know it's a touchy subject for many people. All right, if you enjoy this show and you'd like to make sure it sticks around, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where in return for making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Unfortunately, the guest we had planned for this month, Sean O'Sullivan from 21st Amendment Brewing, has had to reschedule, but not to worry. We filled his spot with Brewlosophy contributor Andy Carter, who, in addition to being an integral part of the Brewlosophy crew, has served on the board of the California Homebrewers Association and has organized events such as the Southern California Homebrew Festival. In order to be a part of this event, you have to make your pledge at patreon.com/Brewlosophy by no later than May 21st, 2021, as Andy will be taking questions on Saturday, the 22nd. As a patron at this level, you'll also have access to all past sessions with guests like John Palmer, Russian River's Vinny Chilurzo, Grandmaster BJCP Judge Gordon Strong, and many, many more. Another really easy way to support support us is by using the links found at brulosophy.com/support. When shopping online, your experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. All right, feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers beautiful stainless gear such as the turnkey BH15 Pilot brewing system, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Brewers Hardware has a ton of unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and homebrewers. Go see for yourself at brewershardware.com, and do not forget to mention Brulosophy at checkout to receive that free gift. That's brewershardware.com. So in a recent episode, it may have been our last episode actually, you heard Jersey and Tim review a beer from Trinidad and Tobago where the person who sent it forgot to include his name. It got cut off on the sheet that he sent in. Well, that person still listens to the show, thankfully, and his name is Michael Johnson. He wrote in with some clarification I thought our listeners might get a kick out of. Michael said, I just heard the beer review, and I'm glad the bottles made it safely. Apologies for the confusion, as I had to have a coworker smuggle the beers back to the U.S. because borders are still closed, and he likely missed putting the second page of the letter into the box. He did miss that, Michael. Those beers were not commercial beers from Trinidad. I just reused the bottles because I thought you might like to see the local labels. That was actually a Chicha IPA where I had to get creative with the enzyme conversion. I agree it's the most sediment I've ever had in a beer due to the ingredients and poor filtration I got from there being no husks in the mash. It was quite a painful brew day. First off, Michael, thanks again for sending those beers in as well as providing some clarification. I'm glad to give you credit. I can now say that I have finally tried a Chicha beer, which for those of you who may not know what that is, well, Cade, do you know what Chicha beer is?
Oh, yeah. You chewing up the grains to get the amylase conversion going. Gross.
It's disgusting when you think about it.
Yeah.
So it makes me so happy to know that Jersey and Tim had drank a beer unwittingly. So did I. That was spent some time in somebody else's mouth.
That's awesome. That's probably the best way to have tried it, right? Because you absolutely had no idea. I can't imagine. Like I've seen this, and I've seen Chicha's becoming a lot more popular. At least more people are talking about doing it, and I see it, and I'm always like, I don't know if I want to try this or not. I understand that all that stuff gets boiled out, and then you get fermented, and there's alcohol, and so there's very unlikely that you're actually drinking anybody's spit. But I don't know that I can get past it.
Well, I mean, I drank it, and it wasn't very good. I mean, we said that in the review, last episode. But there's a part of me that's really glad that I didn't know what it was ahead of time, because I would have probably been even more hesitant to try it. And the fact that I was completely unaware that this beer had spent time in Michael's mouth, I think it's kind of cool. I gave it a shot. So Michael, again, thank you for the clarification. Thank you for sending those beers in. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or drop us a line on social media. Speaking of Jersey and Tim, listener and patron Mark Pellicle sent me a creation of his that he calls Faustian Bargain, about which he says, I love his details here. Is it a mead, a cider, a fruity saison? Mark goes on to say, doubt can only be resolved by action, said some old German guy. Whatever your take on this beverage, we hope you enjoy it with a friend, best paired with stories of betrayal and redemption.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. I don't want to be made to look like a fool. We are learned men.
Well.
Non-proficient learned men, but learned no less.
I got nothing on the smell.
You've had some recent successes on your guessing of what it is, and I have to now break you down in order to make myself look better.
This is watered down something.
Ooh, yeah, it's like dish soap.
It's kind of lemony.
I'm gonna throw something out there so bizarre. I taste lychee.
I don't know what lychee is.
Of course you don't, because you're not learned like me. Lychee is it's a type of fruit that I can't describe it, but get lychee juice and this is what that tastes like to me.
It's not bad though.
No, it's growing on me. Would you agree? There's definitely a fruity taste in there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I said kind of. You know what that reminds me of? Lychee.
No, you didn't even say it right. I don't want to be made to look like a fool. I get such a fruity taste. It's fruity. I don't even know if it's beer, to be honest with you. It's probably not. It's to me, it's like almost in like a fruity. It's fruity.
Yeah. I mean, I said I get a little lemon, but
like
nectar,
lemon fruity, like a lemon fruity, like
juicy fruit.
Juicy fruit. That's good. I like it. I a solid 6.9 jerseys.
All right. I'll do a 6.
Juicy fruit. I write my notes as the guys are doing their review, and surprisingly, I got a sort of fresh lemony note as well. It was I could see why you would think that it was soapy. I wrote on my notes that it kind of had the smell of like lemon pledge, but it wasn't bad. It was just so fresh lemony that it almost felt artificial, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I've heard a lot of people talk about lychee. I've actually never had it either, Tim, so I wouldn't recognize it if I did. But I've always heard that like lemon soap flavor, right? And I've always just kind of wondered, okay, well, why did you do that? Why did you put that in anything? I don't want lemon soap. But you know, a lot of people seem to like it. But the name is what I'm stuck on. All right, so what was the bargain that you had to make to get a lemon soap beer or a lychee beer? What'd you have to give up? I mean, that's the whole deal, right? Faustian bargains. That's deal with the devil, right?
Right. I mean, that's Goethe, right? Johann Wolfgang. Yeah. And so, Faust, he wrote about Faust and this guy who basically is a person who will give up, moral ground to get power and success. I mean, that's the whole story of it. So I was trying to figure that out as well. I got to be honest. Mark has the coolest names and descriptions for the stuff that he sends in. All of it has always been mead-based or cider-based. And getting boxes from you, Mark, if you're listening, thank you. It's always so fun to open it and see what the hell you put in there because you do some crazy stuff, and it's always fun to try it. So if you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage you feel like sending in reviewed on the show, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. We got to take a quick break. When we're back, we're going to be sharing our open and honest thoughts on the various aspects of health as it relates to brewing and beer. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free Recipe Creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. I remember when I was a kid having this conversation with my mom that started with me asking why all the best stuff like donuts and pizza were so bad for our health while the good stuff like vegetables sucked. Given her a history with hedonic pleasure, if you will, some of you have probably heard the episode where I talked about where I come from. I'm not sure she was the best person to ask, but to this day, it's something that I wonder about. It's just a weird thing, evolutionary, I'm assuming. Either way, beer definitely fits this bill for me. It is so delicious. If only health drinks were so good, but alas, they are not. And whether that's something we want to accept or not, there's no denying that beer and alcohol in general can have an impact on one's health.
Oh yeah, there's no question. It's funny that you bring up that story about your mom, because my two vices, I guess that you could say, are beer and sugar. So I love beer. I love drinking alcohol, but beer is what I actually drink more of. I don't drink a lot of the hard liquors or anything. Although I mean, I appreciate them and I'll drink them occasionally.
Sure.
But beer and sugar, I love to bake. I bake with my son. I have like brownies and cookies and icing and all this like horrible stuff for you at our house all the time. I mean, it's like my wife was telling me the other day, she was like, you've got to stop making all of these sweets. It's going to kill us. But that's all sort of the point, right? Like these things, beer and alcohol and sugar, I mean, as we learn more and more about them, they're not necessarily the best things for your body. It's not like eating a kale or something. It's not like I mean, I suppose there are health benefits, and maybe we'll talk about those a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, it's this sort of Faustian bargain, right? I mean, should you consume this alcoholic beverage that you love, and then to what quantity and how often, right?
Yeah, well, and when thinking about beer specifically, it's more than alcohol. I mean, if you take beer and you subtract all the booze that's in it, which isn't that much, there's still parts of beer. I mean, it's made with malted barley or malted wheat, which is high in calories. It's high in carbohydrates, which we know can negatively impact your health, both physically and then I think alcohol, the bigger issue with that is mentally, on a psychiatric or a psychological level as well. I am one who, unlike you, I absolutely love. I have this obsession with good whiskey, and I happen to be a kind of a monstrous fan of Scotch,
Yeah.
But it's I'm going to say this so often that I have a feeling people are probably going to get annoyed. These are just my opinions. I'm not coming at you from a professional psychologist perspective here. But I feel like if we're going to talk about the health issues and kind of the greater impact or negative impacts that booze can have on your health, psychologically and physically, we should probably start with where we, at least in America, that's all I can speak to because this is where I live, why we might hold these opinions in the first place culturally, like where they came from. And you think about what America was founded on, right? It was these Puritans who came over, who wanted to kind of start this own thing where they were left alone and can do their own thing. And it just so happened that they had some pretty strong opinions pretty much about anything that made you feel different than normal, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, you think about like a lot of the basis of Protestant religion, right? Like getting away from the Catholic Church, and one of the things was alcohol, right? I mean, if you look back in history, and again, I like Marshall, I'm not sharing any opinions about whether that's a appropriate belief or not. I don't have those opinions, but it just sort of is what it is. And I was talking with my wife in preparing for this episode, and we were talking about how like up until 10 years ago, the county in Texas where my wife was born and raised was a dry county, which meant you can't purchase alcohol inside those county borders. I mean, that's a county. That's a huge area of land with thousands of people that live there. And for there to be a prohibition on the purchase of alcohol within that border, that's a statement, right? Like that's a big deal.
Well, and what it says is that, I mean, it really speaks to this idea that there are just these deeply held beliefs that alcohol and is bad. It's bad for you. It's bad for society. It does bad things. I mean, our entire country prohibited it for a while, right? I mean, that is, I think about being restricted from enjoying this thing that we do. That just I can't grasp that. Like I can't imagine what it would be like to live in an area where I couldn't just go buy a bottle of scotch or a 6-pack of beer whenever I wanted. That just seems so weird to me. But the reason I bring this up, this cultural aspect, is because naturally, as brewers and beer drinkers, this show, our opinions are started from a basis of we don't agree with that. We see there being on some level benefits to engaging in the process of drinking alcohol, right? Or consuming alcohol on some level.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, it's like you said sort of earlier that there are other things in beer, right? Beer isn't just alcohol. It's sugars, it's residual carbohydrates and other things in there. And I think about like this story that I just heard this, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. I haven't independently verified this, but I'm going to go ahead and repeat it because why the fuck not? That sailors in like, the 1800s and 1700s and stuff, as part of their wages, they got a gallon of beer a day, right? And that might have been the only sustenance that they got for several days.
Right.
So, and I think about a gallon of beer. That's 8 pints. That's a little less than a 12-pack every single day, and not in the presence of food or anything else. And I certainly can see like, okay, a lot of people are consuming this beverage, but then, you look at the other side of it. You mentioned prohibition, and I went to this really interesting exhibit in Austin at the Bob Bullock Museum, which was about prohibition and how it got started, the movement. And in school, I was always taught kind of like, I'm assuming like you were, that this was this, religiously motivated Puritan Protestant versus Catholic movement. But what I learned in this exhibit is that there were a lot of mothers that joined the cause. I mean, there were a lot of women that were pushing this because they were watching children die of like alcohol poisoning or born with birth defects, and watching their husbands become violent and abusive while drinking. And, I can certainly see how, even though there are benefits of the beverage, at one point in time, alcohol, maybe agnostic of beer, played a bigger role, maybe.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with that. And, it's interesting because you look at where we've come today. I feel like there's this, I'm sure there's a quote out there that would make this sound a lot more eloquent, but ignorance breeds trouble, basically. And when, you think about the booze that was being made 100 years ago or further back than that, and the lack of understanding of exactly how to manage, the amount of alcohol that's in something, or if it's just alcohol or potentially something else. Nowadays we've got the ability to, we understand how it's made. We understand distillation. We understand the brewing process and fermentation, such that we're able to control to a massive degree what is happening in the stuff that we're producing. And I feel like there's an element of safety that comes with that, but that does not strip away the fact that there are people out there who let loose, who let themselves kind of go. And from, if we're going to talk about the physical ramifications of, I guess, kind of hedonistically having a relationship with alcohol, there's a lot of bad stuff that can happen. Obviously, we talked about being overweight and obese, and we are going to get into the way that we, Cade and Marshall, deal with our own health in the next segment. But obesity and I don't mean to call anybody out. I am not one to care about how people live their lives necessarily. It's your life. But come on, man. I was at a brewery last night. I was at Crone Wolf Brewing Company having a couple drinks with my wife to start the weekend off. And if you just do a count, I'm sitting there thinking about this episode, and I'm doing a count of the proportion of people who are clearly obese, versus those who aren't. And it's a majority of people. I mean, and especially, you go, and again, I feel this makes me anxious, but this is the truth, right? All you have to do is open your eyes to see this. The amount of people who just seem not to care about their health, there's no way that their alcohol isn't in some way adding, contributing more to their lack of health, which maybe they don't care. And I, again, it's not my place to impose upon them that they should, but it's an interesting observation, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. And I also wonder too, how much of drinking is I don't think covering up for anything is what I'm trying to say. But like, what about like alcohol is a social lubricant? Okay, like what about people who have just sort of anxiety being in the presence of other people? So having a drink or two makes it easier to be around or enjoy yourself, outside of other people. I mean, I think about like times that we've gone to like conferences or that I've been to homebrew club meetings, and like the first couple of drinks, everybody's kind of like, or the first drink or so, everybody's kind of like standing around kind of awkwardly, getting to know everybody. But then like the conversation goes up a level.
Yeah. People start dancing.
Well, yeah, I mean, depending on if you continue consuming, but I'm talking just like, the second beer, like 30 minutes into the conversation. Like next time you're on a homebrew club Zoom, check this out. Like the first 30 minutes is going to be kind of like not slow, but just kind of normal.
Yeah.
And then after about 30 minutes, when that alcohol starts to kick in, the conversation escalates, right? People start having fun. They start making jokes. They start cracking on other people. And I see that. And I also can see why, this became something that people do is consume alcohol. It elevates our enjoyment of certain things.
And I think that's a good word, enjoyment. The truth of the matter is this. I feel like, we've got these culturally deep-seated, like negative perspectives of alcohol, even though we openly admit that we appreciate it and we enjoy it. I have no qualms saying that I love alcohol. But that doesn't mean this is not a black or white issue. I also love donuts. I maybe have one donut every 2 months. I'm not going to the donut shop every week. In fact, I regularly, when I'm at work, people are regularly bringing in donuts and sweets and cookies and all that. I never take it. I don't have the urge to overconsume it. So when I say that I love alcohol, I love drinking beer, I love having a dram of scotch, I love it. I love it, love it, love it. It would my life wouldn't be as good without it. It doesn't mean that I'm an alkie. It doesn't mean that I'm a drunk. You have to moderate, like Pliny says. Otherwise, you're bound to damage yourself.
Yeah, and that's true. And I also see in that, alcohol is a social lubricant, kind of issue. I can see where people would be more interested in like, consuming a little bit more, right? Like, I think I have a little bit of concern saying that, like, I love beer. I've seen enough people look at me and go like, oh, great.
See what I'm saying though? So it's like there's this weird cultural stigma attached to that.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's true. But at the same time, like you, my life is sort of centered around beer now. I mean, fuck, I'm getting a brewing education, Yeah, so exactly. At some point, like I've had to accept, like, yeah, I want to be a beer scientist. I want to be a beer professor. And I don't have any problems saying that. I don't have any problems telling people that I drink beer.
Yeah. Or alcohol in general. And that's what I've come to as well, is at some point, when it comes to things like this, I was raised in a very puritanical, Protestant, religious family and household that also had substance abuse issues. And I don't mean to judge. I've said before that I'm no longer a part of those belief systems or anything like that. But there's an interesting, I don't want to say correlation on a scientific level, but an observed correlation that I've noticed, that those people who end up having the biggest issues that I know of at least, seem to also come from highly restrictive in terms of alcohol backgrounds. So it's almost like this, like I always think of like a wobbling out of balance a washing machine when it's on the spin cycle. Like this wobble is eventually going to explode your freaking washing machine. Whereas a balanced perspective where you're not afraid to say the truth. I love alcohol. I love drinking alcohol. Doesn't mean I wake up and have a shot of scotch, my enjoyment of it in large part comes from the fact that I approach it in a way that I feel is reasonable and sane, really. And does that mean that somebody's not going to look at me and think that I might have a problem? They might, but their definition of a problem, it doesn't have to be embraced by me. Just because, Pastor Bob at the corner church or whatever thinks that I might be an alcoholic, that's fine. Think it all you want. But I'm going to live my life the way that I live it. And I'm going to keep, making the money that I do to take care of my wife and kids and go to my job. And it's never gotten in the way of any of that. And I feel like, here we go, right? We're on the path now, Cade. But I feel like there's this generality with which people like to accept things. Like they feel like if I look at a wall, for example, Cade, and it's a wall that's painted bright pink, and you and I both agree that it's bright pink, how do we know for sure that what you're seeing is bright pink is what I'm seeing? You can't know that, right? And for me, it's the same thing. Why do we generalize to an entire population of people based on what a couple of, old guys with white hair wrote in a book? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. I mean, if they're right, or more often than not, then maybe, but yeah. I mean, but I think I see your point, right? And I think one of the things is that use of a label, right? I mean, you mentioned it up at the front, like calling someone an alcoholic or saying like that guy, oh, I drink so much, I'm an alkie, kind of thing. I mean, I think labels are powerful in that they help us, understand the world around us, but they can also be really, really harmful, And I mean, like calling someone an alcoholic, like for example, I mean, I don't know how comfortable I feel about sharing this story, but I'm going to share it anyway. One of my biggest regrets, well, maybe not one of my biggest regrets, but a regret that I have as a lawyer is I remember one time I had this guy on the stand and he had a problem. He had a drinking problem. He wasn't my client, it was an opposing client. And literally the first question I asked the guy was, Mr. So-and-so, are you an alcoholic?
Oh man.
And there was just
Jesus.
yeah. And there was just silence, like reverberated throughout the courtroom. And he just like looked at me and gave me this horrible stare. The judge looked at me and gave me this horrible stare. Opposing counsel's like standing up, objecting and waving their arms around. And I was like, oh crap. I really shouldn't have done that.
I would have been very anxious if I was sitting in the courtroom and watched you do that.
yeah. And I was like, well, I mean, everything turned out okay. Well, at least marginally okay. That guy didn't get the help that he needed, but my client was helped. And her kids were safe, which was also good. But me asking that guy if he was an alcoholic, I mean, come on, Cade, that didn't help anybody, right? That was a label, and it was dangerous to put that label on somebody. Now, I say that it's important though to recognize when you do have a problem, right?
Absolutely.
I think especially as homebrewers, there's an opportunity to hide issues, right? Like you're not having to go out to a bar and order 5 or 6 drinks. You're just drinking it at the house,
right?
And you've got easy access to it. I think there is that aspect of it as well.
Well, so I was talking with somebody one time and just hanging around. We were camping, hanging around the campfire, and something came up. When I camp, I don't. And again, I have no qualms admitting this. I wake up and I have put Irish cream in my coffee, and then I crack a beer by 9 o'clock in the morning. That's just my camp life. No one's getting in trouble. We're not doing anything too stupid. In fact, a little side: I have never gotten any trouble that I've seriously gotten into, quote unquote trouble. Like I've never been to jail or anything, but has always been when I'm sober. I do this more stupid stuff. I feel like I temper myself more out of fear of what people might think when I'm drinking. I get a little more funny. I might dance around and do some funny stuff, but like I don't have that kind of an issue. I'm the opposite of an angry drunk. I get sappy. My kids will put on, if I've had a few beers and my wife Laura wants to make the kids laugh, she'll put on like sappy songs on YouTube and I'll start crying. Like that's the kind of guy I am, So there's that. Anyways, a little self-disclosure. But we're sitting around the campfire and my buddy brings up, I had to go to the doctor the other day. And when I went in there, they asked me, this is another home brewer. They asked me if, how many drinks I have in a day. And he was like, I just told her 2. And I'm looking at him. I was like, that's a fucking lie, dude. He was like, yeah, but he's like, the thing is, I know that my relationship with alcohol is healthy. I know that, but there's, you go to these doctors who have this more old school perspective of alcohol. And if you tell them that you have, 4 tasters of your homebrewed beer a night on average, they're probably going to be concerned, may even refer you to a program or something. I get it. I was talking with, I'm lucky enough. I've got a GP who, when I went to her and I said, here, listen, one of the things that I do is brew beer. I have a podcast about it. I write about it. She's like, okay. And I was like, so I'd be lying if I told you that there aren't nights during the week where I have a couple more beers than most people. She's like, that's fine. Do you feel healthy? I was like, yeah. She's like, that's fine then, as long as you notice it,
Yeah.
Like that's the perspective that I hold as well and you said it earlier. And I feel like we could spend, 2 days talking about self-awareness and being aware of when something becomes a problem. The issue with that is that I feel like with things like alcoholism and addiction in general, that's part of the issue is if you are the type, and I do feel like there's a personality component. We're not going to go down that path too far, but a personality component to addiction in general. But if you are the type to be compelled or who has that kind of addictive tendency, you're probably not going to notice it. And that to me is the biggest issue is that lack of awareness, that lack of a perspective on yourself and where you're at and what this is actually doing to you.
Yeah. It's funny that you brought that up from your friend, because I was actually going to talk about that a little bit too. I get the opportunity to be in these beer tasting panels here at Oregon State, which is freaking awesome.
That's rad. Yeah.
But one of the questions they ask you on there is like, how many drinks of alcohol do you consume a week? And it was kind of funny. One of the questionnaire said it was like 0 per week. That was option 1. Option number 2 was 1 to 2 per week. Option number 3 was 3 to 9 per week, and then option number 4 was more than 14. And I was like, "Damn, you guys escalated that a little bit, right?" I'm in those top 2 categories sometimes, like usually not more than 14, but usually in that 3 to 9 category. But and so I was like, "Geez, you guys and I felt like a little bit like I had a little bit of anxiety about like checking the box, like what I actually drink. The same thing with the doctor, but telling the doctor that you drink alcohol is always this sort of like fear. Is the doctor going to, like you said, refer me to some sort of clinic or something like that? I'm a home brewer. I love beer.
Yeah.
But that's what it is, right? You hit the nail on the head. It's that awareness that I'm in a industry, I'm in a hobby that addictive personality could happen. Now, I don't think it's going to happen to me. I have my own neurotic issues that we'll get to in a little bit, but
you and me both, brother.
Right. But I did see, that wobbling dish or not dishwasher, clothes washer, the wobbling washing machine. Holy crap. I haven't heard anybody say that before, but man, as a lawyer and as a divorce lawyer, that is so accurate, right? Like it's not something that it's not like somebody becomes an alcoholic overnight, but man, that wobbling dishwasher is exactly right. And, sometimes the dishwasher, or not dishwasher, I keep saying that, the washing machine, like it wobbles, right? And it wobbles to spin your clothes. It's actually supposed to spin and wobble. And then that, that makes sure that your clothes get clean and dry. But when it gets out of control, that's when it can really, really be issues or present issues. So you do have to be aware of that. I love that. I love that visual though.
Yeah, it's an analogy that I actually use in treatment quite often. There's a couple things I want to hit on before we get into the next segment, and this is a weird one for me to talk about, and I will admit that it's largely based on 2 main things. One, my history of being in a family of substance abuse. It was rampant, in my family, and it ended up killing my mother. And so there's that piece of it, which absolutely influenced some perspectives that I have. But then also being a psychologist who literally, that my main job is working and dealing with people who, are alcoholics, meth heads, cocaine addicts, heroin addicts, all that kind of stuff daily. This is not a joke. Like I deal with this on a daily basis. There's this propensity for people to, and I don't mind when it's a joke, but for people to kind of throw around the big A word, alcoholism, or I'm an alcoholic, or oh, that person is such an alcoholic, and laugh about it and do that. Honestly, I actually don't mind as long as it's a joke. What I can't tolerate, and it drives me crazy, is when people use that label to define somebody who really doesn't fit the bill. And you kind of hit on it a little bit earlier that label can hurt. Any label can hurt. Any diagnosis that I put on somebody follows them around pretty much forever, And that's a bad one. That is a stigmatizing diagnosis label that I feel like I just wish people wouldn't be so quick to use it. And I'm gonna use another one that's happening a lot lately that I've noticed in our culture: depression. Right? Everybody has depression nowadays, but most people don't actually know the clinical definition of that. We've kind of just taken this word and we now use it to describe somebody who's upset because their boyfriend broke up with them or something. And I don't mean to minimize depression. In fact, I feel like the overuse of that word in the same way with alcoholism minimizes what they actually mean. And so there's this part of me, I'm kind of on this line where I'm like, well, okay, we can just use these definitions or use these words flippantly and create new ones down the road when we need to define these real issues. But I also feel like, why do we throw those around? Is it fun? Do people think it's funny to call their friends alcoholics,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you bring that up. Another one I would throw in there is, like I said, anxiety. I think people are talking about that one a lot recently too. And there are people that certainly have anxiety disorders, but it's natural to have fear, right? Fear is an anxiety, and that's healthy, right? There's a reason why I don't jump off of a bridge.
That's right.
Regularly. Or I wear a seatbelt whenever I'm in a car. There's a reason for those things.
Yep.
And that's okay. It's interesting that you sort of bring these things up because I have had quite a bit of experience with the I think it's the DSM-5. That's what you psychologists use to diagnose mental health conditions. And it's so interesting to me that there seems to be this prevailing trend through the DSM-5 that fear in and of itself is not a disorder, but it's when that fear in an anxiety context impacts other areas of your life.
That's right.
To a detriment, right? And so that's where I think we really get into this use. And I think I'm increasingly more concerned about people using flippant terms like, oh, I'm depressed. Oh, I have anxiety. Oh, I am an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Because for people that do have those things, these are really serious, issues, right? And they really impact people's lives.
Well, and again, it minimizes. To move the conversation specifically back to alcohol and that, to use those words flippantly, you're the one minimizing. Even though you might actually believe yourself, and that's fine. But from a professional clinical perspective, if it doesn't jibe, it doesn't jibe, and that's the thing. You'd hit the nail on the head. The issue, I don't care what the diagnosis is, whether it's substance use or whatever, the issue is when it has a negative impact on your life. Well, who defines when it's having a negative impact, right?
Yeah.
It's not the psychologist who you're sitting in the chair with. There are some objective measures I can look at, but I'm telling you right now, I had a friend who I worked with who's, this is going to sound crazy, but hey, it's the Brulosophy podcast. He and his wife had an open relationship, and I was just flabbergasted how they could do this. I would think you guys have issues, right? That I would never do that. I just can't imagine. It worked for them, and they're still married today in their open relationship. And I think they are. I don't work with them anymore, but that's the same thing. If you can tolerate your alcohol use, it's not having a negative impact on your physical, body. It's not having a negative impact on your work life and on your relationships with your family, and you're happy and things are going well. Then who's to say that it's more bad than it is good? I mean, that's the part that I get so hung up on is people just want to broadly paint the use of alcohol or the consumption of alcohol for anything other than flavor, as being this bad thing. And I can't jump on board with that. Now, I work in alcohol treatment or substance abuse treatment. I absolutely do personally and professionally have an idea of when it's not a good thing, right? But I just feel like we have to stop. We have to be cautious when we're labeling other people and when we're in a way thinking about ourselves and how we want our relationship with alcohol to be.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that awareness, right? You talked about earlier too, right? Like the excesses of drinking way too much such that it impacts your life. I mean, for example, I represented a guy whose ex-wife was drinking several bottles of wine a night to the point where she would black out for days on end, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, and obviously if you're blacked out for days on end, you're not taking care of your kids. You're not there doing your job. You're not, with your, spouse. You're not doing things that are contributing to society. So yeah, I mean, I think anybody would look at that and go, okay, yeah, objectively, she needs to get help.
Yeah, there's an issue there, right?
Yeah, there's an issue there. But it's that awareness. It's like I think about this too sometimes. I think if I remember correctly from the DSM-5, one of the things is craving alcohol, right? And I craved a beer last night, right? It's Friday night. It's
I'm going to cut you off, Cade, because that's another word, right? Crave.
Oh yeah.
I crave, right now I'm craving a Porta Subs, sandwich. I want one so bad. But what in the DSM-5, the crave that they're talking about is this insatiable, I need it now. I need to get my hands on some booze, Yeah. And that is again, when my wife was pregnant with all three kids, she had different cravings with each one of them. And she'd look at me and she's like, I have to have, ice cream or whatever it was. And I'm like, okay, girl, I'll go get you some, Imagine that, but with something that could literally kill you, That is an issue. We're talking about the DSM-5. I became a psychologist when the DSM-4 TR was out. And the way that they broke down alcohol abuse and alcohol dependence, they don't do that anymore in the DSM-5. But I kind of liked it. It sort of allowed me to organize my thoughts about it. But the main issue, like you kind of mentioned, the big deal was that it was having a negative impact on these various aspects of your life. And if that's the case, then I can objectively say, I think you have an issue. if you don't acknowledge it, if you're not aware enough in who you are and how, then there's nothing that's going to change that. Nobody can, unless you're on that intervention show, I suppose. But there are things that you might want to pay attention to. If you're coming home and you're saying, I have to have a drink to cope with how stressful my day was, that's not the way I deal with stress. I drink because I want to enjoy it. I like to have beers when I'm hanging out with my friends. I don't drink to make myself feel like life is easier to live. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I drink because I enjoy it, and I enjoy the buzz too, right? Like I enjoy that, but I'm not, I mean, I have in the past blacked out and browned out, right? Like that's not something that I do regularly, and that's not even something I particularly enjoy. Actually, I hate it.
So do I. But I don't beat myself up if I do it, and I feel like there's an aspect of that. Do I feel guilty when I wake up in the morning if I had too much to drink the night before? You know what? I don't, because one, I trust myself. I know I'm not going to do anything stupid. I'm not going to hurt anybody. I'm not going to cheat on my wife. I'm not going to throw bottles in the bar or anything stupid like that. I just drink too much,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's interesting that you talked about this. I think about, I'm sure, I don't know if you did, but a lot of people were watching that show, The Queen's Gambit, which was a Netflix show about this chess prodigy and her struggle with drugs and alcohol. And I just thought that was, if you haven't watched that was a fascinating look at how alcohol controlled her life. I mean, it's a totally made up story, right? This is not a true story. It's not based on anyone. I think it's influenced by a couple of different people, but it was this, I thought it was the best depiction I've seen in a long time of real alcoholism and what it does to you, to your family, and then sort of control of it. And I just thought that was really good. I wanted to throw that out there before we talked about anything else, especially in this segment.
Yeah, I haven't watched it. It's on our list. My wife's in my list to get to it. It sounds really good. One last, there are some things I think we call them indicators or like red flags, right? That I do think anybody is easily aware of when they're doing it. If you're hiding your drinking, if you're sneaking out and pulling pint after pint of beer and not telling anybody, and you're doing it so that your wife doesn't see you or that your parents don't see or whatever, there's probably an issue there. I mean, it may not be a big one, but you may just want to check yourself and ask yourself what you're doing it for. Is it just because you don't want to be judged by people? That's fine. There are people out there who have different opinions than we do, and we just prefer not. I don't talk about politics with my neighbors for that reason, so it's not that I'm hiding it, but if you're waking up in the morning and knocking back a couple of shots so that you can go on with your day, I've probably 2 or 3 homebrewing friends are completely out of the game nowadays because they were hiding their alcoholism from us, and it was legit alcoholism. They'd come to the homebrew club meetings and you'd watch them and you're like, boy, they really don't drink that much when we're here. Come to find out, they're going home and polishing off a handle of vodka every night. That's the kind of thing, like, that is serious. And that will, we talked about some of the physical problems. You can get heart issues, gastrointestinal issues, cirrhosis of the liver, all of the mental health stuff that's going on. Chances are, and this is a big thing in the field that I work in, if you are using alcohol as a way to cope, the alcoholism is just a part of the problem. It's what you're coping with is the bigger problem. And that can use some help too. And I'm get help if you need help. And I don't want to be an advocate on this show. We're all about drinking and enjoying it. We don't want anybody to stop brewing or anything. But if you have an issue, own up to it, get yourself some help. And that's kind of where we're at with this. Now, we just spent that whole time kind of talking about our opinions, meandering back and forth between what we think about these words and these labels and all that kind of stuff. When we get back from this break, we're going to be focusing more specifically on us and what we do to maintain our own physical and mental health as brewers and drinkers.
The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the Brew Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brew Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brew Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com.
Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. When I was 11 years old, I moved from California to the Seattle area to live with my aunt and uncle, who encouraged my siblings and I to engage in healthy activities. I played a ton of basketball. I rode my bike everywhere. I mean, I can't believe they let us ride our bikes as far away from home as we did. And in high school, I got a gym membership. And because of this, living a fairly active life has just become, this normal part of my life for me. Though I'd be lying if I said that I didn't experience some blips in my commitment to a healthy lifestyle because of my involvement in brewing.
Yeah, the same with me. I mean, I was generally pretty I guess I should say since college, I've been pretty healthy. Like after the late parts of college and afterwards, I started taking a lot more interest in my own health and drinking patterns. But I said at the top, alcohol and sugar are kind of my two vices, right? Those are things that I love. I love beer and I love to bake sweets, right? And both of those things, if I did them to excess, that would be a real problem for me. And I think this is kind of, for me especially, I think one of the things that impacts my decisions about these, how I stay moderate on each of those things, is I was raised... I did not eat healthy growing up. And that wasn't because my parents didn't try. I was a meat and potatoes and cheese eater for 19 years. I mean, I did not eat broccoli. I did not eat salads. I did not eat green beans. If it was green and it touched my plate, I did not eat the plate, right? I mean, I didn't put lettuce on burgers, no pickles, no tomatoes, nothing that was healthy for me. So it was sugar, starch, and cheese for me. And meat. I ate a lot of meat growing up. And I look now at they're not big health issues, but some health issues that I struggle with today. And I look at that as a reason, right? And so I think for me, I have a little bit of a neurotic tick that I don't want these things, beer and sweets, to lead to issues down the road for me. Yeah.
I am in the same boat. I wasn't going to go back to my childhood, but you did, so I guess I will too. I'm a twin. I have a twin brother, and 21 months younger than us are twin sisters. And my mom was a single mom. Drugs, alcohol, all of that we lived in this tiny little mobile home up until I moved up to Seattle to live with my aunt and uncle, angels, really. But she raised us. I remember if she'd come, every night she would ask the kids, "What do you guys want?" And it was fried pork chops and mashed potatoes. I mean, she'd make these huge, delicious meals. When I was in 5th grade, 5 foot tops when I moved up to Seattle, and I weighed 140 pounds. I was huge. Again, a lot of that was quote unquote baby fat. I get it. I stretched out a little bit, but when I moved up to Seattle, like I mentioned earlier, my aunt and uncle were like, that's not how we eat. That's not how you live a healthy life. We were eating salad for every meal. There was a salad before dinner, and then just healthier options. And I'm really glad for that. Obviously, it really, really kicked my butt into shape, figuratively and literally. And, I just think like, man, where would I be today if it weren't for that influence?
Yeah.
But yeah, it kind of set me on this path of just, it's not hard for me to eat healthy. Like, again, I don't crave pizza. I don't want to eat McDonald's all day long. My wife and I cook, we ground turkey is our normal meat that we eat. And we just cook healthier options. It's not like we're vegetarians or vegans or we don't go on weird diets, but we don't eat unhealthy often. If we're going to eat out, it's usually like once or twice a month. And it's still kind of healthy stuff that we eat. And that's a conscious decision. Again, we're not nuts about it. We're not like gym rats or anything like that. But I want to maintain a level of health because in doing that, it allows me to enjoy things like beer more often. And that's a big thing for me. And I feel like if you were to get my wife in here, she would never, ever, ever want anybody to hear her voice on the show. I don't know why, but she got a beautiful voice. But if you were to get her in here and ask her, she'd say the same thing, that it's important for her that I maintain a level of health because it proves to her that I'm not letting myself go, that I'm not falling into the problem of drinking too much.
Yeah. I mean, I told you just a minute ago that I started changing my life in terms of health around the time that I was 19, 20, so late college. And that's when I met my wife. And one of the things that she told me I think we were 20, and she said, look, if you want to stay in a relationship with me, you've got to eat broccoli or like a vegetable. Okay. I want you to be here when you're 30. Okay. Like I don't want, and I mean, she was joking, but she did kind of like, maybe that's the emphasis that I needed, was a girl that I was, interested in pursuing, to tell me that I needed to eat healthier. But it helped. And like you, that's what this is about for me. So like I love beer. How many times have I said it on this episode?
I love it too, Cade. We're in the same boat, my man.
But beer for me, it went from a hobby to a career, right? Yeah. I mean, I gave up being a lawyer for this beverage.
You clearly have a problem, Cade.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just a drunk. No, but I mean, there is something to be said for that. Just like a quick aside, right? I was talking to somebody about this earlier this week, so it's on my mind. But yeah, I mean, like, imagine telling all the people, right? Like, anybody asks you, like, wait, you did what?
Yeah, it's
a
weird story, bro. I'm telling you.
Right, dude. And I'm like, I don't have any problem talking about it because I love beer, right? Like I'm happy to do it. But I certainly understand people looking at me going like, hey, all right, you had this successful career as a lawyer and now you're doing beer professor and stuff. Even my own family, right? Whenever I had anxiety about telling my parents. They've all been super supportive. But imagine telling your mom and your dad, who are super proud of you, that you've got this like successful career as a lawyer and you're working for a great law firm in Austin and doing all these like awesome things. There's a lot of pride in that from a parent perspective. And then be like, no, yeah, I'm going to go brew beer.
Yeah. I'm moving to Oregon. See ya.
Yeah. It wasn't that fast. So we could talk about that at any time in the future. But the fact that beer went from, something that I just enjoy doing to a hobby to a career for me, it's a huge part of my life.
Yeah.
And so I worry often that drinking too much could lead me to having to give up that dream or part of my life. And so for me, there is that sort of aspect of it. And that's probably me just being a little bit neurotic. And like, my wife would tell you too, she wants me to be healthy. She's not at all concerned.
Dude, I'm telling you, I can relate with you 100%. I feel the same way. And I think you again, you hit the nail on the head with a huge part of what keeps me in line, besides the fact that I have zero interest in being unhealthy in my relationship with alcohol, is that if I overdo it, I could lose, particularly for me, this thing that I've built up over the last almost 8 years, Brewlosophy. I love this. And if I were to let it have the thing that we talk about and write about, if I were to let that have such a negative impact on my life and ruin what allowed me to get here, that would just, it's like a neurotic thing that I have in my head that I'm terrified of it ever becoming something like that. So that is another contributor to keeping me in line.
Yeah, I mean, and I have that like sort of mental aspect of it, but there's also kind of a physical component of me too. And I know you don't, because I've talked with you about this, but I have shitty hangover genes. Like hangovers, they suck for me. I'm a puker. I feel nauseous after I have more than like 4 beers. And so there's also this like physical component a little bit for me for like, if I go, if I'm going to have several beers, or if I'm just going to go and drink a lot that night, like I know that the next morning I'm going to pay for it. So there's also that physical piece.
Okay, I'm gonna throw some questions at you, Cade, and I want to hear what you have to say. And don't, we're being honest. This is Brews Views. We're unabashed. We're telling the truth here. Do you regularly exercise?
Yes, I exercise every day, and that is a really new experience for me. So this year, I started exercising every day. Literally, January of 2021, I started exercising every day. And you know how I did that? I tied it to drinking. So I don't allow myself this year to have a beer unless I have worked out. And it's actually fucking working. Like, I'm so surprised that it's actually working, because I wasn't one to exercise before this year. So I'm glad you asked that question, because if you had asked me that in December of last year, I would have told you I work out, I try to stay active. We hike, I walk, but I don't do like a formal workout regimen. But this year I actually started doing it, and I just think it's hilarious that the reason why I did it is because so that I can continue to drink beer.
So I love that, dude. And I'll be honest, kudos to you, because I don't work out that often. My wife and I are committed to going to the gym at least 3 days a week. I say at least, it's just 3 days a week. We have it on the calendar, and we stay there for about an hour and 15 minutes. I run, I do the elliptical, I do some minor weightlifting, and it's purely to stay to keep active. So my heart keeps going, to shed some calories, to do all of that. And again, a big motivation for that is also I don't like count calories and only drink the amount that I burnt or anything like that. But it's just to stay balanced, right? I do have a little story about the exercise thing, though. When I was in grad school, right before my first daughter was born, who we are recording today on her 12th birthday, happy birthday, Hazel Ray. When prior to her being born, I was in grad school and my wife was working 9 to 5. And so grad school, if anybody who's done it, you're not there every single day. And if you don't have work to do, you're just kind of sitting around at home bored. At least I was. And I would get so bored, sitting there watching reruns of Jerry Springer or whatever was on TV. And finally I was like, screw this. We had a gym membership. It was right down the street from my apartment. I'm just going to go to the gym and watch whatever they have on there and at least get some exercise in. And I started exercising probably 5 to 6 days a week. I got to the lowest weight. I was actually uncomfortably, I didn't like the way I felt necessarily, which is weird. But that again, that was one of those things where I was like, okay, I cannot let this go. I can't get back to just being sedentary and sitting around, especially when I started really getting back into home brewing after I graduated from grad school. A part of my doing that was I have to at least exercise some. And I talked earlier about having a little blip. There was a point where I started, you start to make these new friends in the brewing world, and you're hanging out with them all the time. Some of those times when you might have gone to the gym instead, or you might have done some exercise. And yeah, I put on like 15, 20 pounds, and I was like, whoa, I got to check myself here. And again, for me, that was motivation to get back on track and to do my thing, to make sure that I'm exercising and eating well, not drinking as much and all of that. So next question, Cade, I have one for you here.
All right.
Do you ever go days without having alcohol?
Yes, I do. I do go days without having alcohol. Now, that's probably a rare occurrence for me. And I think that is a little bit tied to this year. Now, I like to have a beer every night. I mean, and so I usually have at least one beer every night. That's my sort of standard, is at least one beer a night. Usually just one, sometimes 2, sometimes 3.
Sometimes 8.
Sometimes 8. Yeah. Although that's also rare as well. Cause like I said, my hangovers suck.
Yeah.
But there are nights that I don't drink. And actually, interestingly, it's been increasing since I started working out. And I don't know, I don't know why that is. Maybe I'm getting like endorphins from working out or something like that. But since I've been working out every day, there's been an increasing number of nights that I just don't drink a beer. But yeah, you know, I mean, so my habits are like, I do generally consume a beer every night, but I don't generally binge drink all that often.
So I don't drink every night. And that I remember saying that to somebody who every once in a while I'll be out and about and somebody recognizes my voice from the show or something, and I'll sit and chat with you, take a picture or whatever. But I was in this conversation with these folks a couple years ago, and this guy and his wife, and we got into the conversation about how often I must drink. And I was like, dude, I maybe 3 nights a week I drink. And if it's during the week and I have work, it's maybe a beer, like what would amount to maybe a pint. You know, I'm usually drinking out of our taster glasses, so it's not a full pint. It's usually just sampling stuff to see if it's ready type of thing. I just don't have, these days, I don't really have an interest in drinking outside of social situations by myself. I might pour myself a little dram of scotch if we're watching a family TV show or something, and my wife will make herself a little cocktail, and that's it. So I am not, and that's another thing is there was a period, that same period where I put on a little bit too much weight, where I would get home and I had 7 taps on my Keyser and they were all full. I was the one doing all of the experiment or the most part of the experiment brewing. I was doing the Hop Chronicles. I was brewing for a Short and Shoddy. And so I always had so many beers on tap that a part of my drinking was just, I got to make room. Someone's got to drink it, you know? And I remember thinking that is the dumbest excuse for forcing yourself to drink these beers when you don't really care to drink it right now, you know?
Right. And I love that you share this too. I love that we both have these sort of different ways that we approach exercise and drinking, right? And I think that's really an important point because it does talk about balance, right? So if I am drinking beer every day, one of the things that's important to me is to work out every day. And so that's how I sort of balance that aspect of my life. Now, again, I'm not a doctor. I don't know if that's probably not how it works, right? I'm sure it's not healthier because I work out every day and consume a beer every day. But that's, that's what balances and that works for me. And I was reminded of this study that came out from Harvard last year. And this happens once every 5-10 years. It's one of those study listicle things. This is do these 3 things and you will increase your life expectancy by 10 years, and it's always some combination of healthy diet, don't smoke, watch your alcohol intake, and exercise, right? But I think about those, and then I remember that's actually really powerful, right? If you think about it in that way, balance these things, right? If you're going to drink alcohol, work out more or eat healthier, or, if you want to limit your alcohol intake so you don't work out as much, or you can eat, fried pork chops on a regular basis. I think there's all this just sort of gray area between there. And that's a really important thing that I wanted to talk about, and make sure that I mention today is that balance. Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. Balance is key. People hate that word. I love that word. And I love that word even when we're describing beer character. I think it works too. Well. People love to hate stuff, man. We live in a weird world right now. I remember, I forget who it was or where it was, but somebody called out the term crushable. And as soon as they were like, that's a dumb word, I started using it as much as I possibly could. Anyways, I digress. Okay. So we talked a little bit about how we manage our physical health as brewers and drinkers and whatnot. And I feel like both of us, and I know Jake does the same thing. Jake is constantly doing keto diet stuff and exercising and all of that. I know Phil's got his thing going. We all mind this stuff, and I feel like that's a big part of what kind of brought it's not what brought all of us together, but that shared mentality of having a healthy relationship with alcohol is a part of what allows us to do what we do in the way that we do it, and I think that's cool. From a mental health perspective, I am my wife once, I'm trying to remember exactly how she said it. She said, "You are the most painfully optimistic person I know," something along those lines. And I'm just a happy dude, to the point that it might annoy other people. I don't get upset about things. I don't have an angry bone in my body. People don't understand it. I don't either. It just feels normal to me. But I've never struggled with issues like anxiety or real depression or anything like that. I tend to see the good in everything and the silver lining and all those other fun ways of saying it. So I don't
necessarily, I've never used alcohol as a way to cope. I've never come home from work and been like, God, that was such a bad day. I need a drink. That's the last thing on my mind if I'm stressed out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have I'll say that I have had some of those particularly tough days, especially whenever I was a lawyer, that I'm like, I gotta have a beer. Like, I just, I gotta do that. And I'll admit that, right? Like I'll freely admit that. And I think that certainly that's, maybe it's not the healthiest approach to alcohol, but damn, I mean, some of those days sucked. Right?
Cade, that's what I'm saying though, is that the only reason you would think that that's not a healthy approach to alcohol is because our culture says it's not. If you're aware of it and you say, yeah, you know what, my wife is like you, Cade. She'll say, I'm having a stressful day. I'm just gonna make a cocktail and that's gonna relieve some of this stress. Cool. If you're drinking 3 bottles of wine, right?
Yeah.
Then there's an issue there. But if you're just having a cocktail to take a load off and it's a part of your process, what's the difference of that and going on a jog? I mean, one is more physically healthy for you, sure, but it's still something that you're using responsibly.
Yeah, and that's it, like, too, right? Part of my love for this, hobby and the industry, beer and alcohol, is a healthy respect for the substance.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's, again, we've said it a bunch of times, but I think that's what really it comes down to for me is I love this beverage. I like consuming it. I like the effects of alcohol. I like feeling the buzz. I love drinking beer, but I also don't want to have negative impacts to my life. And I don't ever want to get to that point. I don't ever want the wobble of my washing machine to cause an explosion.
I was at work a few years ago, and this officer who I didn't even know, these 2 officers came to my office. I don't know why. And I think they just needed a quiet place to shoot the shit. And this one guy's talking about how he divorced his wife because she found out he was cheating on him. And I'm sitting there listening to this dude I've never met openly talk about this, going, whoa, geez, yeah. And he looks at me and he's like, so, when are you and your wife getting a divorce? And I was like, we're not. Like, I don't know why you're asking me that. And he's like, you're have you ever cheated on her? And I was like, there's no way I would ever do that. I'm not judging you. I was like, to each their own. I will never do that. He goes, you don't know until you get there. And I looked at him smack in the eyes and I was like, trust me, I know. And that's the same way that I am with alcohol. I don't have the constitution that doesn't know when I'm doing something. I know when something's becoming bad. It's just, that's not me bragging. It's just a part of my neuroses, I guess. But I know for a fact I will never have an issue with alcohol because I won't let myself. And there's this element of commitment to that. There's this element of, I'll admit, like, personal morality and that I just will not break from. If it ever were to get to a point where I even thought it was tickling a problem, I would stop and I would figure shit out, and so that, that's kind of that mental part of it for me, is that I just have this strong knowledge and awareness about my relationship with alcohol that I just know it's not going to become an actual issue. And it's an interesting thing. Like, I hear people, I mean, even you kind of said it, where you're like, I try, or I'm doing these things that are, and there's these maybes. And if I'm, what I just know, I refuse to let it become anything more than what it is in my world,
Yeah, and I wonder how much of this for me is based on my career as a divorce attorney, right? And seeing what, like, real alcoholism can do to families, and maybe that's what impacts it a little bit too, is maybe just, like I said, just a little bit of neuroses that I have. I don't have an addictive, quote, personality, right? Like, I like, that's never been me. I've never been addictive about anything. Ooh, except maybe World of Warcraft.
We've talked about that, Cade.
Yeah, you and I have, and that's a Barstool story for anybody that wants to hear that stuff. But I don't really have, like, an addictive personality. I mean, other than that, like, even beer, I know I'm not addicted to it, but that doesn't stop me from wanting to be overly careful. Yeah, I guess I would
couldn't
say.
agree more. Couldn't agree more. You're just minding yourself and being aware of it. And I think that part of it that doesn't come. That's not a mutually exclusive thing for you with beer. That's how you are with everything, I would imagine. It certainly is with me. Yeah. And it's just a part of my thought process, and it's kind of unconscious for me. It's just a part of how I approach everything in life, is it's not, I'm not going to let this ruin me or hurt me or have some negative impact on my life. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could, I guess, argue that's one of the reasons why I'm no longer a divorce attorney is I didn't want the emotional aspects of that job to affect me in my life anymore, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's not to say that, you know, being a divorce attorney is not a noble pursuit. It was, and I enjoyed parts of it. But there were parts of it that I didn't. And so that's why I'm not doing it anymore. But yeah, everything, right? Like if you approach your life that way, I mean, I think that's a really healthy way to approach, you know, these things like beer and drinking and sugar, like consuming cake and cookies.
I'm lucky because I cannot stand, I mean, for the most part, sweets. They do nothing for me. And my family, everyone in my family, my wife, my kids, they love it. They eat dessert every night. And I
am too.
I just don't, it does nothing for me. So
I wish I was like you in that way. No, I have to have a dessert like every night, something sweet to finish the night off.
That's my family as well. And I'm the weirdo who doesn't do it. Okay. One of the more fun experiences that I've had since I've been doing this brewlosophy thing and going out, there's this, maybe I'm alone in this, but I don't think I am, where I just kind of presume that everybody who's in the home brewing and brewing worlds just focuses on beer and brewing, when that's definitely not the case. It certainly isn't for me. So I love learning about other things people are into. I have a good buddy who's a massively good home brewer, brews all the time, does some like collaboration stuff, who's also like, I had no idea. He is a huge gun guy. Like he knows everything about every gun. He goes shooting more than he brews. I had no idea, you know, for like 2 years knowing him until we just sat down and chatted about it. What are things that you do that have nothing to do with brewing or alcohol or anything like that keeps you grounded?
Science fiction. Sounds kind of strange. Dude, I am such a nerd about scientific or, you know, science fiction. Let me back up real quick. I'm not a Trekkie. I love Star Trek. I've never been, I don't go to conventions or anything like that. So I'm not like that aspect, but I've watched probably every, or at least most of the science fiction TV shows and movies that have come out in the last 2 or 3 years. Like I'll stay up at night watching that stuff. I love it. Like that's one of those things, that's a hobby for me, right? If beer is now my career, my hobby is now science fiction. But you raised a really interesting point there, which is like, what are the things that I like to do that aren't related to beer? Do you remember, when you and I met in Asheville, do you remember that trip?
Of course I remember. It was awesome.
Okay. Yeah. I think you and I are going to share this, but what was your favorite memory from that trip?
Oh man. My favorite memory, and I think we might've talked about it on a previous episode, maybe not, was when we went to, it was like this whiskey club or something. And it cost a penny to get in. And I think, who was with us? It was like Drew Beecham, you and me, and some other folks that we just kind of picked up along the way. And we sat up there and we sipped on these weird, amazingly delicious cocktails and just talked.
Yeah, exactly. We just talked, and we didn't talk about beer, but we were drinking cocktails, so we weren't drinking beer. We just talked, and I remember I was having a conversation with Drew Beecham about this sci-fi series that he was reading and recommended, and you were having a conversation about Scotch with one of the other people, and we're all just sitting up there talking about something that had nothing to do with beer or brewing, and that was one of my favorite memories. I'm glad that you brought that up and asked that question because I didn't think about that until you said it.
I can't wait to go back there. Actually, that was so much fun.
That place was awesome.
Some of the stuff that I've been doing since before beer was even a part of my life, or brewing was a part of my life, is music. I taught myself how to play the guitar. If you lived in Seattle in the 90s, you had to play an instrument. I mean, that was just kind of a requirement for living there. And where I was from in Bothell, Washington, there was all kinds of bands popping off from the Redmond area, the Greater East Side or Seattle. And so it was just this huge influence. And, you know, I had friends who had guitars, and I picked them up and started messing around. And then I eventually ended up getting my own guitar and kind of teaching myself how to play. And then I started writing songs. I was in a band for a while. And to this day, I mean, if I'm sitting around the house and not drinking or anything, and I just kind of don't feel like watching TV, I'll just come to the office and pick up the guitar. Usually when you get on and we're prepping to record, you'll hear me playing the guitar, you know? And that is, it's weird because it's hard to explain. I don't fancy myself like a virtuoso by any means. I'm not that good, but I like to sing. I like to play the guitar, and there's something that I get out of it that just feels grounding. brings me back to like, this is just a thing. You got these 6 strings that are making these noises, this organized sound, and it just makes me feel so good, you know? So that's one big thing that I do, probably the biggest thing that I do outside of beer and brewing. And it's something that a lot of people have no idea about, you know, and I think it's kind of fun. And I would love to hear from other people, like what they do outside of beer to keep them grounded. I think it's cool. The other thing that I've gotten into lately, oh boy, and people are going to love hearing about this, is crypto, baby. Woo! You guys have been
you and Dogecoin, man. I like, it's like a daily on the brew chat
to the moon, brother. Dogecoin to the moon. We're going there. And here's the funny thing is it's not like I invested $1 billion in it, but there's something about you put a little bit in and you watch this thing go up and you feel like you're a part of a community. And the reason I bring this up isn't to promote Dogecoin or SafeMoon. Go buy some, guys. It's just a lot of fun. But the reason I bring it up is because if you're a part of that community, it feels an awful lot like the homebrewing community. And it's so weird and it sounds dorky and people are going to hate on certain coins and all of that stuff in the same way that when we publish an article, there are people out there who think that we're trying to manipulate people and and there's something about that I just enjoy. I was kind of pondering this while I was sitting at my desk at work the other day going, this feels exactly the same to me. When I'm sitting and I'm in the Dogecoin subreddit or whatever, and you see people come in and try to stir shit up, and you got a whole bunch of other sheebs, as they're called, who come in and they're getting your back. It feels exactly the same way. And there's something about that community that I find really fulfilling, and as dorky as it might be. And so I actively, intentionally engage in these things outside of the beer world, again, for the purposes of just keeping me grounded. And not everything has to be alcohol, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to find ways to keep yourself grounded. And then I don't know that the way of keeping me grounded is buying a currency based off of a meme.
Oh, here we go, Cade. Don't hate, Cade.
No, I mean, I've seen you guys and what it's at right now. I hope that it lasts long term for y'all.
And if it doesn't, really do. You know what? If it doesn't, that's okay. It's still got the community.
Yeah, no skin off your back, no skin off my back. But yeah, no, stay grounded. And like I said, so it's baking. It's science fiction, it's baking, and it's just like hanging out with my wife and son.
Yeah.
We like to hike too, so I mean, all these other things that I do that make my life rounded and keep me grounded. I wouldn't be able to do this without that. So,
yeah, I'm with you, man. And I feel like family also is just a big thing. And I spend so much time with my kids. If you follow me, my personal account on Facebook, you'll see that the only things I ever post about are my kids or my wife or how I'm cheesy. So, well, there you have it. That was an interesting episode. I'm glad we did it. I feel like I was able to navigate my way through it, adequately, I suppose. I expect that there are people out there who are just chomping at the bit to say something, who have some feedback. Please don't hesitate to email us feedback@brewlosophy.com to share your thoughts on this. If you think we royally screwed something up, you can share that as well. Again, I'm not interested in arguing opinions, but I'm happy to hear yours and potentially even read it out on the show, and we can address it in the future. Cade, any last words before we kick this one in the can? I feel like a part of me wants to almost give some like recommendations for people, but I'm going to leave that alone. I don't do that as a therapist. I'm not going to do that here either.
I was struggling too. Like, I had some advice written down that I wanted to share at the end of the show, but I hope that our discussion was enlightening for people, or that you found it interesting. I hope that also you don't take anything what we said as advice.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just make your own opinions.
I love that you say that, because I feel like it's so important that these are just our personal opinions. We're not judging anybody who does things differently. We love you. I'm telling you, if you're listening to this show and if you know who Cade and I are, we love you. We would be your friends. If you're cruising through Corvallis or you're cruising through Fresno, make sure you hit us up. We'll hang out with you.
Absolutely.
We want you to be healthy. And the best way to keep brewing and to keep this being a part of your life is to do the right thing and make sure that you're aware of what your relationship with alcohol is. So, alrighty, don't forget to subscribe to the Brew Lab podcast, where Cade goes into the lab with brewing scientists to discuss research they've performed on our favorite beverage, and make sure to keep up with all of our beer and brewing antics over at brewlosophy.com. The Brulosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.